Do you see God as having any role in the evolutionary process?
For me, God is the power or the intelligence that shapes the whole of that process. As creator, God's act is the beginning of all creation.
So by setting up the laws of physics in the first place, in which context evolution takes place?
Things unfold within that.
What about intervening during the course of evolution?
I find that rather suggests that God couldn't have made a very good job of making the laws of physics in the first place if he constantly needs to be adjusting the system, adjusting the works. And I think that's a slightly different question from the question of miracle, though again it often
related, isn't it?
It's related. But if you think of miracle as God watching something going on down there and occasionally thinking, oh, I better fiddle around with that a bit, or I better intervene there, that has the same sort of problems. If you think of miracle as those sets of circumstances in which somehow or other the underlying action of God breaks through the surface to create something new, I think that's consistent with an underlying stability of divine action.
There are evolutionists who call themselves intelligent design theorists who find sort of particular gaps in evolution which they otherwise find difficult to understand, and they invoke God for this particular moment, this particular jump in evolution.
You've always, I think, had problems with this notion of gaps. The God of the gaps is an old cliche, isn't it? And 20th century theologians, I think, spotted some of the weaknesses there. Why should God create a system in which there are gaps, unless he simply wants to leave a track of his presence? So that would be my worry about that kind of intelligent design language, that it depends in the wrong way on the limits of our knowledge. I think there are two ways of talking about the limits of our knowledge, with one of which you'd probably agree that, you know, there are aspects of the universe we're never going to get our heads fully around, and we're always moving into something fresh. And then there's the gap that's, if you like, contingent. Well, we happen not to have the equipment to answer that question at the moment, mental or technological, but there's no particular reason why we shouldn't. Depending on the latter sort of gap is a big mistake, I think.
Yes. I mean, my feeling is that the question of the existence of God is in the latter category, that it should ultimately be possible to discover once and for all on a scientific basis. I mean, it is, after all, in a sense, a scientific theory.
What, the existence of God?
Yes.
Well, no, I don't think it is, you see. I worry about that, and as you know, one of the things I've queried about the way you've set up religion is to see it as a second-rate form of explanation. It's served as that sometimes, but I think to talk about the existence of God, St. Thomas Aquinas in the Middle Ages says it's not that creation is a process, and like any process you would have to ask, well, where does it come from? Creation just states that there is a dependence between the world and God, and that every act, every power, every energy, every form of intelligence that we are familiar with rests upon a prior action of God, not as filling a gap in the explanatory process, simply saying that's where it starts, that's the foundation. Just as you might say, well, there's something in the first nanoseconds of the universe as we know it that is the key to everything else.
Can I come to the question of miracles, which you've touched on? You do believe in some of the New Testament miracles, I mean, such as the virgin birth and any others, I mean, the raising of Lazarus.
Yes, and the raising of Lazarus, yes.
Okay. Now, isn't there a kind of mismatch between your view of science as something that God doesn't interfere in and that somehow he made it right in the first place? How do you reconcile that with what looked to some of us like sort of more like cheap conjuring tricks and not the sort of grand creator that you've been portraying?
I think if you start with a picture of God outside messing around with the works, you are in danger of getting into the conjuring tricks model. I think, though, that both in the New Testament and in the Christian tradition, what you have is something a bit more like this, that there are certain moments when factors come together in such a way that there is, you might say, an opening in the world in which the underlying divine action comes through in a fresh way. It's timeless, it's there all around. It's not that God says, I'll go in there. Here are the things coming together. Take the birth of Jesus. I think what a lot of people have said, and what I've preached on myself from time to time, is here you have a long history of preparation for the coming of God in a new way. Here you have a particular life, that of Mary, opening itself up to the action of God in a certain way. And then there is, as I say, an opening. Something comes through, something fresh happens, which is not, if you like, a suspension of the laws of nature, but nature itself opening up to its own depths. Something coming through now.
I'm not sure what that means. It sounds to me awfully like suspending.
Poetic language.
It's poetic language.
And I realise that there are ways of talking about that which do simply sound like interrupting things.
I mean, I, of course, love poetic language, but there does come a time when you worry that people are going to misunderstand it as...
Or that it's a way of wriggling out of hard questions.
Well, I mean, it's one thing to say, in some poetic way, it was sort of right that Jesus should have been born of a virgin, but when you say, I actually believe it happened, that's a statement of fact. That's a statement of scientific fact. It happened.
It's true or not, yes.
It's true or not, and I don't think you can really wriggle out of that by doing some poetry, but much as I love poetry.
No, I'm not saying that's the argument for it.
Yeah.
I think when you're looking at the New Testament texts, one of the things that you have to bear in mind is these are texts which come from 2 or 3 decades after the events they purport to relate. They're locked into a set of personal witnesses. They're not just remote folktale sort of texts. And then I would have to say, given what I believe about who Jesus is, I'm almost tempted to say nothing would surprise me as to what would happen around.
No, but the reason you believe who Jesus is the Gospels themselves, and so isn't there a circularity there?
There's a circularity into which you have to take the risk of stepping at some point. You do or you don't. I think there's sufficient there to persuade me in, sufficient number of lives around to persuade me that stepping into that circle is not vicious.
Yes. I'm not sure that I'm prepared to join you there.
Well, no, I thought you probably wouldn't just on the off chance, but...
Yes.